Hello and welcome to the Mount Gretna School of Art lecture series hosted here in the Pennsylvania Chautauqua's Historic Hall of Philosophy. Tonight we have a lecture by Ophir Agassi, Approaching the Unknown. And before I introduce him, I want to thank some of our sponsors, the Mount Gretna Arts Council and the Arts for All grant of the Foundation for Enhancing Communities, along with Stinson Stroud. I'm going to talk about Ophir Agassi very briefly before I invite him up. He grew up in New York City, urban New York, and got his BA from Yale and his MFA from the New York Studio School. He had a pretty cool show recently that caught my attention at the Painting Center. It was a solo show in New York City, and has very recently moved to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which I didn't realize. So he's almost in the neighborhood. Well, I will say that he was in John Mitchell's first painting class when John Mitchell was a TA at Yale. He was at the Chautauqua School of Art with Rob, and we both share a very, I think, influential teacher, Stanley Lewis. And so even though I just met him an hour ago, it was like jumping right in because we were kind of coming from almost the same, similar DNA. And the other thought that I had is one thing I think that happens, and you had a formative experience in the landscape, is that lends itself to abstraction, or just beginning to understand abstract painting. And then that also begins to suddenly medieval painting makes sense after you understand abstract painting. And it was a very kind of similar journey for me. So I'm excited to have him here, and he's going to be a critic for the students in the next couple of days. All right, come on up, Ophir.
Just right. Okay. Thank you, Jay. I want to thank Jay first of all for bringing me, and all the people Jay thanked for making Gretna School possible. So when I titled the lecture, Jay said, "We need the titles." I said, "All right, I know." As I was preparing the talk, I meant it to be essentially about archetypes and the collective unconscious, and how that relationship to the work that I do with that. And as I prepared the lecture, it became about something else. And I was like a little bit freaking out when that happened. And then it seemed to me that it's actually appropriate to the talk. And that experience that's the experience for me, that's been the experience of art making for me, and it's also been the experience of life too. So it's like you have this desire, you have this dream, you have something you want to achieve or get or attain or reach to. And at least in my own experience, anytime that I actually get there, it's not what I thought it was. And it may be, it's related. If I get close enough, it's related. But in its actual presentation, its particulars, it's nothing like what I thought it was going to be. And then even when something about it is, experiencing it completely changes. So that's it. That's essentially the macro view. That's what this whole thing is about, approaching it, right? But where it shifted on me was, it was good to mostly take out of Jung, and I'm going to talk about the archetypes and the collective unconscious, and it's a collection of essays that Jung himself wrote, and the title is The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. But then I was looking at Whitman, and it was something I really wanted to share with you all from Whitman, and he took it in a totally different direction. And so, but essentially, this situation is very similar to what it was in the beginning too. And so, part of this approaching the unknown has to do with those ideas of the archetypes and the collective unconscious, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then part of it has to do with the ideas that we get from Whitman. And that's the two parts. We'll interweave them and we'll see how it goes. So I'm just going to lay out in a very general way before we look at any languages, right? So it's complicated. And you did a lot of work, you lived a really long life, so that's like 80-something years. And these collections of essays are, this is quite a bit to digest, but in a nutshell, my best understanding of the collective unconscious as he describes, as he talks about it, as he explains it, is that there's that would be the unknown. In a nutshell, that the collective unconscious would be the unknown part of this. And the way he speaks about it essentially is that there's a vast realm of the human psyche. And most of it is unknown to us. And that is what's contained in the collective unconscious. And that the way he talks about it also is that it's not just the personal unconscious, right? The personal unconscious would be some experiences we've had personally, things that have come into our own life and then moved from the realm of consciousness to unconsciousness, or perhaps came into us, never were fully conscious, like when you walk 20 steps and how many things come into your consciousness, but you don't register them. But all of that would go into your personal unconscious. And that's a lot of what Freud deals with, is the personal unconscious. Jung was talking about this collective unconscious, which is goes beyond that and is shared amongst all of humanity. And not only that, it's like any other aspect of the human construction. Like, we have a specific digestive system, and it's unique to human beings have a system. And like that, we have an unconscious. That's an aspect, this collective unconscious, this psyche. And essentially, if you're born with it, we're all born with it. You don't have to experience anything to have this. In other words, a human being raised by animals with no contact with any other human being will contain within their psyche this collective unconscious. And so that is the source for the archetypes, the collective unconscious. The archetypes arise from this. Another thing to say about it, the ego is the part of the consciousness that's known to us, right? So that's where the light shines. But it shines in a specific direction at a specific time in a specific place, like only can illuminate so much of that vast realm of the unconscious at any given time. And the unconscious, the collective unconscious would be like there would be no center. There would be no center. It's decentralized. There's no organizing principle that Jung was able to identify. There's no structure that he was able to identify to the collective unconscious. You can't organize it or say that it's going to do any definite thing, because it's always going to confound your expectations. And it essentially deals with the realm of paradox, with what the conscious mind, the ego, that light that's shining in any particular direction at a given moment in time, needs to organize, needs to be centralized, demands to be focused, logical, understandable, explainable, and struggles with paradox. When the collective unconscious comes to, normally he says, right, everybody knows this much at least, that a lot of his work was done by looking at people's dreams, right? So people would come, take their notes and bring their dreams to him, and he would interpret these dreams, but not just interpret them casually. As a scientist, as a psychologist, he had many patients. So he had case studies after case studies. And what he noticed, what came about was these archetypes. And so Freud calls them archaic remnants. Jung takes it to a different place. And essentially he says the archetypes are these ancient forms that exist within the collective unconscious that arise spontaneously. So the way a bird knows where to fly in winter, or how to build a nest without being taught. These archetypes will come up for people. They will arise from the collective unconscious at such time as they need to for that particular person. And they will appear in whatever form is appropriate to that person. So the same archetype can appear in many different ways. The purpose of these archetypes coming to us is essentially what he calls the process of individuation. That's laying out in a nutshell, and we'll get back to it as we look at the work. So that's the approach in the unknown for me. Initially, it was all about that process of relating to the archetypes as they appear to me. As an artist, working it out through the work, every human being, this is the common inheritance of all humankind, at least in my best understanding of human. So, but if you utilize them, and he consciously utilizes it in this process he calls individuation, which is in a sense a process of growing into your larger self. And that's my loose paraphrase of Jung. He uses a lot of words that aren't in any of the dictionaries that I own. Okay, so that's the one major big idea for the lecture, and then the second big idea, but a little bit smaller, but it'll inform it. So the question is, what do you do? So if you're approaching the unknown, like, okay, well, for me as an artist and as a human being, this is what has always interested me. I want to know what the possibilities are that are contained in being human. I want to experience that, whatever that means, right? And I don't know exactly what I mean even when I say that, but I have a feeling that there's so much vast possibility, right? And I want to experience as much of that as I can, and understand it as best as I can, and understand what and who I am, right? In this expanded identity that grows as you grow, as you are able to include more and more and more of what wasn't part of who you are into what you consider to be yourself. So that's my interest in the work, and the art for me that's the process, that's the path that I've chosen to take and explain a little bit why after getting to the Whitman. So the Whitman, I'm gonna just read it. So this is Walt Whitman from A Song of Myself. It's the first poem, Leaves of Grass, which is his kind of lifetime's worth of work. The first edition of Leaves of Grass came out, I think, when he was 37, he says it a lot. He edited, he changed it, there are various editions, and this version of the first section of Song of Myself is not the same as the first edition, but it's the one that works best for this lecture. So. Well, it also was published by Howard Bloom in Best Poems in the English Language or whatever, and this is the version he chose for that publication. To me, it seems to me when like reading Whitman or approaching any of the masters of the plastic arts that I've studied, for me, it's always seems appropriate to approach with a certain attitude of humility in the face of humanity. So here we go. I celebrate myself and see myself, and what I assume you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me, as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing the spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this self, from this soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health, begin. Hoping to cease not for them. Creeds and schools and events, retiring back a while, suffice to what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad. I permit to speak at every hazard, nature without check, with an original energy. So for my purposes, he's saying a lot more than I'm going to say he's saying. Right? But I'm going to just pull out what I need to pull out for now. And then you all can read into Whitman and from Whitman, whatever you got, right? So for the purpose now, I'm going to say that I think Whitman is also talking about approaching the unknown, approaching something vast or something larger that he's experienced already. And I think he's laying out how he's going to do it. It's like, okay, well, this is how we're going to do it. And in a way, also his philosophy of how you approach it. This is what I see it. So he's saying, I think he's talking about an internal and an external, right? There's a within and without. How you approach the unknown from within and from what you experience within, from what you know within and what becomes revealed within, and the same thing, how you do all of that from without. In other words, the stimulus coming from inside of you and the stimulus coming from outside. And that involves nature in both cases, right? So as Jackson Pollock, that interviewer asked Jackson Pollock, something like, why don't you work from nature? Or is it important to work from nature? Pollock, who was not known to be, by the way, like an incredibly eloquent guy, right? But in this moment, he just spoke and he said, I am nature. So he's saying, I don't need to work from it. I just am it. Okay, so he's saying, I celebrate myself and sing myself. And I think that's the internal, right? That's the internal nature. That's what we can know of himself. And what I assume, you shall assume, and you wouldn't using assume in the sense of assumption. Assumption like to take it into myself. I will assume this. It will become me. And what I shall assume, what I will become, you too will become. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. In other words, this is the common inheritance of all humankind. Anything I can achieve, anything I can realize of myself, anybody can realize of themselves because it belongs to all of us. And this is also connects to being the collective of consciousness, that aspect of being that we share in common. So I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf with my ease, observing the spirit of summer grass. I think he's talking about patience. He's talking about, I have this grand goal I want to achieve, right? I want to experience this vastness of, but in order to do that, you have to be able to lean and loaf at your ease and observe the spirit of summer grass, And of course, he talks about my tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air. I mean, he's laying out, like, what am I? Physically, essentially that way. But also, born here of parents, born here from parents. He's talking about lineage. And he's talking about also what we all have in common, which is we are all born from parents. And born here from parents, the same. Our parents come from parents, and they have parents. And so we don't actually know the very first. I mean, we don't even know. We don't talk about approaching the unknown, like what's beyond, but we don't even know what's the beginning. But he's laying it out as, born here from parents. In other words, okay, this much I know is that I come from somewhere. We all come from somewhere. And that relates to the process I'm going to talk about too, which is, learning from the masters, learning from the ones who came before you. In other words, as an artist, who are your parents? Right? So, you have, normally in spiritual traditions, right, you have your birth parents, and then you have your godparents, you have your spiritual teachers and stuff. They become your parents in a different way, right? So, as an artist, we're talking about who are your parents, right? So who are the masters you take for yourself? And then he says, I, now 37 years old in perfect health, begin, which I think is really good because they said to give it to the students. And we are, like so many people younger than 37 probably, I just recently passed it. But the idea, like this, it's not just about feeling young when you're old. It's also about that attitude of innocence, that approach of innocence. In other words, I can be 37, I can be 57, I can be 77, but I can approach it with an openness, right? It doesn't have to shut down as I go. It can open up as I go. And he says, hoping to cease not to death. Finally, creeds and schools in abeyance. So I think he's saying, okay, we're talking about the parents, we're talking about the masters, we're talking about the teachers, and then we get into the school, and we ask ourselves, okay, what are we going to learn? And are there rules? And is there a way that it's done and all of that? I mean, I ascribe to, like, one of the reasons that art is the path that I chose is because there are no rules, right? So, and I think that's what I'm positing that that's what he's saying too, which is creeds and schools in abeyance. We're gonna hold them back. We're tiring back a while, suffice that what they are, but never forgot. We won't forget them. We won't forget the schools and the teachings and all that knowledge that has been amassed, all the knowns, right? All of what's known. We will take that in too. But essentially, I harbor for good or bad. I'm not making moral judgments, right? I'm in advance. Like, I'm going to approach it in advance and say, well, I know already that if that falls on that side, it's good, and that falls on that side, it's bad. He said, I harbor for good or bad. I'm going to look for good. I want it all. And I permit to speak at every hazard of nature without check. So whatever it is I come to with whatever baggage, whatever presuppositions, whatever morality, good or bad, whatever kind of judgments I can avoid, but my intention is to let nature speak without check. So at every hazard, at every moment of questioning, at every moment of uncertainty, at every moment of approaching the unknown, what I don't know, what it is, let nature speak, let nature say whatever it has to say, unchecked, and then finally it's beautiful with original energy. And I know he's not talking like to be original, right? Like, let's be original in our work. He's talking about with original energy, with the energy that has the ability to originate, from which things can be born. Okay, so what are we gonna do with all that? Okay, so this is Hokusai. So Hokusai, he did a lot of, everybody knows the wave of Kanazawa, but that's part of the 36 views of Mount Fuji. That's actually one of his depictions of Mount Fuji, like we've seen Mount Fuji in the distance, and the wave up close, right? And he did 100 views of Mount Fuji too, which was black and white. It came out when he was about 70, I think he was 75 years old when the first edition was published around 1834 or something. And this is what he wrote. So he was 75. Okay, and this is what he wrote. From the age of 6, I had a penchant for copying the form of things. So, like, he's a Picasso. I mean, he's like a Mozart from the age of 6. And from about 50, he just skips over all those intervening years. From about 50, my pictures were frequently published, but until the age of 70, nothing that I drew was worthy of notice. But he's got this patience to say, okay, now at 73, I was somewhat able to fathom the growth of plants and trees with the structure of birds, animals, etc. And then he continues with this attitude that Whitman's talking, like Whitman expressed so beautifully about this innocence, this openness to whatever presents itself, nature, permit to speak at every hazard, nature without check. Thus, when I reach 80 years, I hope to have made increasing progress, and at 90 to see further to the underlying principles of things, so that at 100 years I will have achieved the divine state of my heart, and at 110, every dot and every stroke will be as though alive. Definitely the attitude of someone who did not get to 75 and mastery and world renowned and say, okay, I did it, I arrived, I'm done, I know it. Right? He's still looking at what the possibilities are, what's unknown, what's still yet to be experienced. Those of you who live long enough, that's us. Because he didn't live to be 110, but we're here. Bear witness that these words of mine prove not false. So, okay, so this is like the parents, right? This is me studying Cézanne, this very, very strange picture by Cézanne. It's like this one nude woman and then all of these figures that are like just crowding her, and such an aggressive, odd picture, and opening up like a space, like a womb, right, that can contain. And I didn't actually ever understand this picture, but it's just like going there and confronting these masters, and you choose your master. So now I'm speaking to like this, to myself and to the students. So so you choose for yourself, right? Like, I've been told Cézanne was great, but I decided for myself that he was great, and that's why I went to do this, right? And then Matisse, this is almost a random selection from my notebooks, but I mean, these are some of the greats that I look at. So this is a painting that's in MoMA, the dance. I almost thought when I started this, like, is it too simple of a painting to even draw from? I mean, what are you gonna do? Like, there's these 5 kind of nude tone figures on a basically blue background. But then as you draw, you open up. And I mean, just like one thing about this painting, just one very simple thing is, at first it looks like a ring, like a ring around the rosy, right? And you're just going in circles, right? And then it's almost like they could be going in either direction if it's really just a ring, and like which way are they going? But there's like a sense that they're going clockwise, right? You feel like they're moving this way. And it's because it's not a ring. There's that diagonal movement of that figure on the bottom towards the upper left-hand corner, right? And as soon as that opened up, the whole painting opened up. And the ring opened up because they're not actually holding hands, which I didn't see when I just went up to the painting at first. I thought this was like a circle dance and everybody's holding hands. But then I realized that she's not holding the other one's hand. And that's how you know the direction, because it's almost like she can't keep up. Like she's like when you're dancing in a circle and then someone lets go and you got to try to jump in and catch them. And then as soon as I realized that she wasn't keeping up, this dance, this expression of joy, suddenly I saw that shadow underneath the bottom figure's knee, like that left knee, and I realized that maybe she's not even standing anymore. Like, like especially if you're dancing with kids, right? And then so like one of them loses their, and then they fall down and they're stripping their knee and they're trying to get up. So she may be falling. And then the whole story of the painting changes. And this protagonist who's not keeping up is telling us so much about what's happening in the painting, the whole direction of the movement. And so, then it opens up and it opens up and it opens up. But that's one illustration of the process of how that happens by looking at these, at them, and just trust it. So that's why it's so important who you choose as your teacher, right? You have to trust them, right? Like I have to trust Matisse that he's going to teach me something. And if I trust him, then I can relax into it. I can lean in both. So you have to trust your teacher, And I trust him. And that's why, just a side note, Picasso is obviously one of the greatest greats. I have to trust him the same way as a teacher. So with Picasso, I have to choose the painting. I have to choose the painting by painting. Well, with Matisse, I can almost across the board, because I feel like he's never trying to pull one over on anybody. He's just the generous teacher all the time. Here's Matisse looking back at the Heen. This is also in MoMA. So it's this the life I would never have looked at. The Heen is like this, it's that school of painting that really embraced all the materiality of life. And he painted grapes and oranges and perfectly, perfectly, but it was just like, my sensibility today, I wouldn't have done it. But then Matisse painted this, and he painted this in around 1934 or something, so way after Mademoiselle d'Avignon, way after Cubism, way after the groundwork was laid for analytic Cubism and synthetic Cubism, and after Matisse himself had demonstrated his synthesis of analytic and synthetic Cubism in other paintings. And then he goes back and he makes this painting, which looks like it's on the cusp of between analytic and synthetic. It's like he's showing you that transition and then beyond into something else. Matisse's synthesis of synthetic and analytic Cubism. And as I'm drawing this painting, I would draw the Matisse that I was interested in, right? I would never look at the Heen, and then I'm trying to say, why is he painting this in 1934? He doesn't need to study the Heen and work through analytic or synthetic Cubism at this moment in time. And the more I drew it, the more I became absolutely convinced that he was painting this painting for us. For me, in that moment, as his student, And then for us, meaning anybody who wants to pick up that mantle and say, yeah, he's my teacher too, he's painting for you. And I understood this as a painting lesson, constructed for all the students of painting, all the lovers of painting. And all you need to do is stand in front of it and draw and draw and draw and contemplate, and it will open up further and further and further. And I mean, we can spend hours just on how this painting opens up, but the major takeaway that I'll share for this lecture is he taught me to respect the painting. And it's a painting lesson, and it's also a lesson about respecting your forebears, those parents, from parents before them, right? Like understanding, okay, maybe you're not interested in the technique, that's okay, right? But to understand like a certain attitude of humility when you approach a master like that, because there's a reason that they were able to do what they were able to do. And maybe you don't want to do it that way, and maybe it's not relevant to you, that expression, because the times have changed and the sensibilities have changed and what we want from art has changed, right? So it'll look different to you. What you want out of it will be different. But when you approach these parents, right, a certain attitude of, because, I get into this too, right? Picasso wasn't such a great colorist, of course, Picasso was a great colorist. Picasso, not so great, right? So I said that once, because I'm cocky and younger and whatever. Don't always approach things with the attitude that I'm saying, goodness is offering us, right? And so I said it to Ressica. Paul Ressica is like maybe certainly one of the greatest living colorists, if not the greatest living colorist, in my personal opinion, right? But certainly of his generation. I said to him, Picasso not the greatest colorist. And he looks at me and said, better than anybody you or I know. So what are you going to say about that? So Matisse. And then, studying Matisse, like I drew the piano lesson, which is in the same room. Is this painting, the dance, the piano lesson, and the Moroccans. That room in and of itself is like a holy sanctuary. Hopefully they didn't mess it up like they might have. So the piano lesson, as I drew that one, I understood that one as a painting lesson too. And I'm starting to see all of Matisse's paintings as paintings, works of art that are showing us something we never saw, and also for any of us who love painting lessons. Okay, this is Stanley Lewis drawing. So this is what happened. He was in L'Orangerie in Paris, and with his wife Karen, and he was drawing from the Renoir. And the Renoir, this is what Ressica told me about Renoir. He told me, Renoir is the greatest painter. And I looked at him like, come on, seriously. I mean, again, like, it's what a bad attitude, right? But I can say that now. But in the moment, I thought I was thinking of Renoir. And he goes, yeah. I didn't get it when I was a young man either, like you. But when you're old like me, you'll see Renoir is the greatest. So, okay, well, I'm not old enough yet, but Stanley drew the Renoir in L'Orangerie, and Karen took a photo, and for some reason she texted me this photo. She's like, Stanley in the L'Orangerie. Oh my God, just got a text from Stanley Lewis's wife. And Stanley Lewis is one of the, so my background, I come from like all those years in Brooklyn that we skipped over until we got to the VA. All those years were taken up with like a religious education. I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home and a community. That was my upbringing. Right? There's two essential aspects to the holy text of the Jewish. And the Torah includes the Old Testament, and it includes, what you would consider like kings and judges and writing and psalms and all of that. And then the Talmud, which are discussions on the Mishnah, right? And then there's the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. Okay, all of this essentially is a library full of Torah, right? And that's two major categories. One, the written and the oral. So the written is the Old Testament. the judges, the kings, and all of that. The oral, which is now written down, is the Mishnah and the Talmud and all those discussions. Originally, the written was written, and you would study it, you could read it, and you could read the words, and anybody could pick it up and read. So it's there, open to anybody who can. You have to be able to read, you have to be able to look at the paintings and see them, but they're there for you, without any teachers, apart from what's written. So that's how I understand these paintings, these works of art that are left for us. To me, that's the written Torah of art. It's there as long as you're willing to put in the work to see it. It's there for you to learn from. The oral tradition was what was handed down from, according to the tradition from, well, essentially Moses had the original revelation on Sinai, right? So he has the revelation from God, so he gets it direct. And then he passes it oral to his student Joshua and to the wise, to the elders, and then they pass it on, so on and so forth through the generations, oral. So they literally, each generation hears it, memorizes it, maybe takes some notes, but never officially write it down. There's no compilation, there's no agreed text. It's the oral tradition. And in order to understand the written, it's taught. You have to know the oral. So there are certain things that will never make sense in the oral, in the written, if you don't learn the oral. Or you end up with a weird situation like with the Karaites. So there's one example where it says, Jewish men practice, whatever. There's a certain ritual, right? But it's done a certain way. And in the written, it says that you'll place these things between your eyes, literally between your eyes. So if you only have the written, this is how it's taught. If you only have the written, like the Karaites were a sect that only followed the written, we would be putting them right between our eyes, like right at the third eye. But the oral always taught that it was put more on the forehead, like above the hair. So things like that. Now that's a simple example. Obviously, once you get into other examples, it can become more complicated. But the idea is that there's the written and an oral. So my understanding is the written is all of the works of art, and the oral are the teachers you meet that are alive when you're alive. Like that's the significance of being alive in this moment, at this time, in this place. Are the people we meet now, right? So all of us, like this is our time on this earth, and our teachers are the ones who are here now with us, who are willing to teach us and who we're willing to learn from, right? So Stanley is for me, he's one of those, right? So he sent me this, and then I find myself years later in the Orangerie, and I'm like, okay, what am I going to draw? And I've got like an hour and a half, and the place is closing, which always seems to be the situation when I'm in a museum. It's going to close too early, and I got to draw something, and I don't know what to draw, and I'm like, wait, Stanley drew that one, I'm going to draw that one. And that's the conversation that we had, that Matisse is having with Deheen, and that Stanley is having with Renoir, and that I want to have with Stanley and Renoir and Matisse and Deheen. I want to be in that conversation, like what, I want to hear what they're telling me, and then maybe I'll have something to say, and even if doesn't have that original language, right? But at least maybe we can say it in a way that's relevant today to the people that are alive today. Oh, okay, one more thing. This is in the Met too. This is a sculpture of the Bodhisattva Manjushri. I'm just showing it to you because it relates to some of the paintings that come later. If we get there, we get to talk about those architects. Okay, Oregon and landscape. Now I'm going to kind of fly through some images, but to give you this idea, so there's the written and the oral, and that is the teachers, that is the tradition. And then there's nature, and nature within and without. So I learned from within, which we'll get to, and then also from without. So this is from observation of nature. So I went to Oregon and I did these drawings of the cliffside and the Pacific Ocean. And, I'm like, this is from observation, working with ink, training myself to deal with all the issues that come up when you can't erase, and value and all the things that you do, all the reasons we work in certain mediums. So, and I'm also going to say that even then, though I didn't know exactly what this was, I'm working with archetypes, except that but not with awareness. And to some extent, I think that is what Jung is saying. Like, we're always working with archetypes. And to some extent, how you relate to the archetypes is your reality. How you see the whole world, how you see specific, each individual is because of how these archetypes are embodied for you in your psychic experience of the world. So the same archetype will appear differently to different people, might even appear differently to you at different moments in your development in your life. He calls them forms without content. They become filled with content, depending on who is experiencing it and how it's appearing in their experience. Okay, so I'm just pointing it out because obviously there are tremendous archetypes with the ocean, and water, and with trees, but I just was working from nature, just trying to make a drawing. This is like a 6-week period in Oregon on the coast of the Pacific Ocean, and I was literally on a cliff, like sleeping there, the ocean is so loud. And the Pacific is so loud, and the Pacific is terrifying. If you're I'm from the East Coast, so the Atlantic is scary enough, but it's calm enough. But the Pacific, oh my God. Now we climb down the cliff, and then at high tide, the water would come straight to the cliff. So if I didn't leave my spot down here, I almost got caught on the beach as the tide was rising, and I had a couple of hours walk to go back to climb the cliff. And there's something really terrifying about that. And there's a certain urgency that I think is necessary. And so however you can get to that moment, that place of urgency in the world. Okay, so looking at the trees, looking up the cliff, and working from nature, essentially. That's what all of these images are. And then years later, but now in oil paint, and it's early in the morning, sunrise, and then there's actually sunset, same view facing west. Once you start to see the archetypes, you start to see them everywhere. So it's not like mountain is the archetype or tree is the archetype. The mountain could be the archetype for something else, like the Father. Do you understand? The form can change. It doesn't have to appear in the form you think it's going to appear in. And I'm not even trying to interpret these because I have no idea. But just to show some work from nature. This is more recent, just within a couple of years ago. The black and white drawings were 2006 or something. Okay, so just more works from nature, right? Standing now in front of the sea, in front of the ocean. And now, I knew I was dealing with the water element. That much I knew when I was painting the ocean. So, but and that is elemental, right? And then it's this liminal space. That's sometimes land and sometimes ocean, right? That's the tide, right? So sometimes it's that sand is covered by ocean and it's part of the ocean. Sometimes the ocean recedes and that's land. So this is a shifting. Right? For me, that's what the ocean shore is. It's that shifting reality that's constantly in flux. And of course, we know that it relates to the position of the earth, moon and the sun, and how all of these celestial bodies are working upon one another. And we know that something around 70% of our physical bodies is made up of this element of water, right? So if these celestial bodies are having such an effect on the tides, that the tides are moving in and out of hundreds of meters or so you can obviously imagine what's happening in every cell of the body, the water content, right? How is that affecting the movement internally as well as externally. So I mean, I was aware of these things, but essentially I just said, okay, I want to see I want to know what it looks like. Like, I think I know what the ocean looks like. What does it look like if I look at it now for 3 hours as the sun's rising again? You discover things. Like, it's not just green or water's not just blue. I mean, simple things like that. But like, when you discover it as a painter, I mean, that can be just like that. Or like a warm blue next to a cool blue. Suddenly, like, that could be like a kind of a moment of epiphany for painting, right? So that's what's going on in this work for me. And then different days, different life, like a mistier morning, right? A bright, sunny, clear morning, and a misty morning, and a little bit more turbulent morning where the tide has receded and there's those vernal pools, right? So you have that, and then you have land and vernal pool and land and ocean, and so that's kind of tempestuous. And then the next day or the next time or whatever, again, a really bright day, but so different from the other bright day. So we can talk about, like, when we talk about all of these ideas, the archetypes and the collective unconscious, there's a certain element of universal in it, right? I'm going to go really fast because this is just like, okay, so urban landscape, right? So trying to organize this situation for myself. I think I got somewhere. Like, it feels like this is, the whole space is topsy-turvy and tipping over, and like what that even means. So Bruce Gagnon talks about form and space in painting and sculpture. He says form is the object, which is the other. So what's space? Space is itself that contains the object. So to some extent, also like what we're saying about your experience of the archetypes is your experience of your reality, right? In other words, to some extent, it's only what you're perceiving. So that's that internal space. So this space is obviously different from that one, and certainly from that one, right? There's a certain settling down that happens. So this is the working from nature, the external, and bringing it into the practice. In other words, even when I'm not yet aware of this, like how I'm dealing with the archetypes and what the significance of it, and not consciously doing it, but okay, I'm saying, but what can you do, right? There's so much unknown in that, but you got to do something. You can't just sit around. You're alive, so you must move. And then interior, I go super fast. Just more painting, more taking in from outside. Okay, now the New York Studio School. So that's where I first really encountered the oral tradition. Now, Stanley Lewis I met, and I had other teachers along the way. But the studio school is about that system of learning, that atelier system, right? The atelier system. Something I think I think that Jay and I come from enough of a similar background that there's a spirit of that here, even though I just arrived, so I'm guessing. But it feels like the idea is, we're here to make the works, right? You're here to make the painting. So that's what the studio school, the teachers and work, so you're working from nature, you're working from life, you're working from the masters, right? So all of that, and from the teachers who are there at the school alive. This is a painting of the atelier, so I'm talking about the atelier system, right? The system of being in the studio with the teacher and working, which is different from like a lot of master's programs now, which is not about working together, right? It's about you do your thing, you go off and do your thing, and then you come and talk, right? So now the atelier system obviously incorporates that too, but so these are my atelier paintings, something like 4 by 5. These 3 I put in here for a very specific reason. This was a trip with Graham Nixon to Italy. So we're in Italy, we're studying these masterpieces from the early, middle, late Renaissance, and we're there with our teacher, Graham. And Graham is showing us the various paintings like Signorelli and Masaccio. He wants us to see how the concerns of each one is different. So he says to us, okay, I want you to understand, make this drawing of the models about volume. Make this drawing of the models about mass. And make this drawing of the models about weight. So these three drawings are what I was trying to do when he said volume, I did this. Then he said mass. I said, okay, I did this, right? I didn't really know what he was talking about. What's the difference between volume and mass? And essentially, like I understand weight and mass are not the same. You learned it in chemistry, or physics class, whatever. But essentially, like if I'm looking at this form, if it has a mass, it has a volume, and it has a weight. So what are you talking about? Like, what do you want me to do, right? And this was one afternoon with Graham Nixon. He's recently passed away, but a great teacher of mine, yoga and science. One of the most gentle human beings, and also one of the most intense, maybe the most intense in me. So that's what's happened. Like Graham is like that. So I finally, so I responded. This was my response to volume. Graham was like, oh, okay, all right. This was my response to mass. And he's like, okay, all right. You starting to get it. I thought that the first one was no good, that this one got volume, but he's telling me, okay, you're approaching mass. And I'm like, fine. And then he said, weight. And then I got this drawing. And he said, oh, okay, you started to get weight. Now, like years later, I can see what he's talking about. Like I can see the weight now. Not tremendous weight, but I mean heavier than this, which is more about volume and mass, right? There's some weight in there, but what I was trying to figure out at the time was I had no idea what I was doing, how I was responding, and why he was saying to me, here you did this, and here you did that, and here you didn't. The only difference that I perceived for myself was what I wanted to do, my intention, my desire. And the lesson I learned, before I learned the lesson about volume and mass and weight, the first lesson I learned was you have to intend it into the painting. So it'll be there, number one, first and foremost, if you want to put it in there. But then you can figure out how it works out. Then you can put it in there with more and more and more intention. But first of all, you have to want it. And I think approaching the unknown too is like, it's kind of a philosophical thing. Like, what do you want? Because you can not try to work with that at all. You can have a completely different, you could work just with the knowns. I still think you're going to get, the unknown is going to come at you. Like Jung says, if you try to avoid the archetypes, then they force themselves in a very unique way onto your consciousness. Okay, so that's the lesson. Now, going internal, this was the first time I said, okay, I've been working from nature, I've been working from the masters, a certain amount of invention. I didn't show you much of that work. And then this is the first time I said, okay, I really want to make paintings that I have no idea what the painting is about before I start. So I don't want to know that it's a story of whatever story like Titian was painting or Sam was painting, like these great myths of Adonis and Artemis and whatever. Like I didn't want to start with the story, no. I wanted the story to tell itself through the painting. But when you start like that, how do you have any specificity about what you're doing? So I didn't want to just start with a mishmash either. I wanted to start with an intention, because that's what I had learned from Grant, right? I wanted to have the intention there, but I wanted the intention to be open enough to be a container for whatever it is I was going to discover as I made the painting. But I didn't know how to do it. So I came up with this method that years later, now I'm learning more about how Jung did this active imagination thing. Well, I came up with this thing, so I had this deck of cards that I used to play. My grandmother was an accountant. We never gambled, but she told me how to play cards. So we used to play war and fish, Those are the card games I played growing up. And I had this deck of cards that she given me. So I took the deck of cards and I wrote some just words on the card, like simple words. I started off with nouns, so like they'd be super simple. Like a tree. I just revealed my method. It's just a tree or whatever, like words. Like some of them were more were more suggestive than others. Like, there might be a sibling card, But essentially, to stimulate the imagination, right? So that there's something very specific there that I'm dealing with, and the associations will start. So I would pick 5 of these cards at night before I would go to bed, and then just let those elements, just play around, however they play, in sleep or not. And then the next day I would make these paintings in one sitting. So it might take all day, but it would be done by the end. So in other words, not too much of the conscious interference, right? To some extent, obviously, to construct the painting, I have to take the elements and I have to put them together. But then, as you all know, once you start the painting starts to force itself on the painting itself. So it says, okay, well, you have to move this, you have to move that. And that's something like what Jung is describing in his process of active imagination, or the process of individuation. He shows an example of sometimes he has his patients actually paint pictures, even if they're not artists. And that will happen to the patients too. They'll say, I really wanted to depict X. And as I did it, it forced itself into Y. And then that's where the process of understanding where they're at and how these archetypes are moving around in there. But at the time, I had no idea about any of this active imagination or these Jungian techniques, I had read The Manticore, the Deptford trilogy. I'd started to read Man and the Unconscious, which is a collection of essays. The first one is by Jung and then by his disciples. So I was somewhat familiar, but while I was working on this, I was not thinking about that. But these elements are shifting around. So there's a specificity to these paintings. I know certain things before I start, and I have a very specific intention about those elements. And then as they start to work together in the painting, they shift. And then by the end, the painting has told me the story that I needed to hear, right? And then hopefully it resonates to other people. But that was the process in these paintings. That's how they came to be. And then sometimes, it's really embarrassing what comes out, right? I don't have to show you all the most embarrassing stuff. Sometimes you want to do that because it feels like it's important to be honest in that way, right? Okay, so these were all part of that group of paintings that came about to be this way. And these are all 8 inches by 10 inches. I wanted a size that I could manage in a day, and to treat the whole area in a day. And then sometimes I would do variations on these later. So I did like 4 or 5 variations on this one, which I call Overturn. And I know exactly what this story is about. It's so specific for me now that I've told it in the painting, but I won't tell you, because the other thing that Jung talks about with these archetypes is that it's necessary for each individual to activate that archetype for themselves. So I can't come to you with the definition of it and have it mean something for you. It has to present itself to you in its unique way, and you animate it through your own personal experience. And that's, I think, part of the process of the painting itself is the artist does their part, right? But art is not a spectator sport. You got to get involved for it to work. Okay, so some more. I did around 77 of these. I'm only showing you a handful. This one kind of horrified me, but it happened, I was in U-Cross at the time. I would go for these long walks, and there were always dead deer around that the vultures had been picking at. And then I picked some cards, and they all came together, and then it made this. And I don't like clowns at all. I really don't like clowns. Never liked clowns, and I would never want a clown next to the little girls. And I just was like, what are you doing? And that's what this was all about, and that's what this talk is about too. It's like, I would like to do this. I would like the paintings to do that for me, because that's what I would like the yoga to do for me, and all of these processes to do for me is to open up what I wasn't expecting, and maybe even what I didn't want, but in a way I wanted that, right? I wanted that thing, that unexpected, that unknown I wanted to be able to assume Then I started to wed some of them. So this was like 3 of these fortunes came together and then changed. And then you see that figure, that white figure on the left. Okay, so you'll see that later, how that figure becomes, like I got into that archetype and then I made a whole body of work just from there. So you'll see that, you'll see it again. Okay. This is about 8 inches by 20 inches. And then some of them would become, like I tried to work in clay or other materials. And now that is the plastic arts, right? I want to see how the space is shifting when you shift the material, right? So painting is always going to be flat, but then relief is when the painting comes out a little bit of the space. And then, but everything changes. As soon as you have to put an element in the painting that you think is sitting in one space in the painting, and then you have to actually put it in space in a relief, and it's not in the space you thought it was going to be in. That's another way for this aspect of the unknown to open up. So that's what was happening here. Okay. So I was speaking to a friend of mine who's very humble, and she seems to me like a true yogi. I mean, a real seeker, a real spiritual seeker. And she was talking about the same idea, approaching the unknown. In other words, expanding beyond your limits. So I asked her, what can you do? She said, well, you can practice with devotion and presence. So it's this idea of, basically she's saying, is showing up. So even if you don't know, right, because you don't know what is waiting for you on the other side of that expansion, what is waiting for you beyond your present limits. If you knew, then they would be within your present limits, So how do you approach it, and what can you actually do? You can't touch what you can't touch. You can't experience what you haven't experienced, but you have to do something, right? So on the one hand, you sit. On the one hand, you sit and you meditate, right? But on the other hand, like, you have to be doing something too, right? That's the East and the West, right? Okay, so now I'm encountering life. So as an artist, I think maybe a lot of people might experience this, especially if you come from like an atelier system, like a disciplined artistic background, right? It's like I used to have a lot of trouble going on vacation. In fact, like for many years, I didn't know how at all. Like, how do you go on vacation? Because as an artist, I said, okay, I'm packing for a trip to Jamaica, and I'm going to take 3 sketchbooks of different sizes. And I'm going to pack my watercolors in there, and I'm going to put my ink, my pens and stuff. And it's like, I was like, well, are you going on vacation or are you going to work? I was like, well, I mean, both, because I'm an artist and I can't take vacation because all my life is my work and my work is my life, So I end up in Jamaica and I have my sketchbooks and stuff, but I want to chill. I want to be on vacation. So for the first time in my life, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to draw, right? I'm not going to paint. Right? Just this curious side point is I found this place in Jamaica, and I'm not going to tell you the name because it was this fishing village that nobody had heard of and nobody wanted to go, and everybody's going to strawberry fields. And my wife and I found this little fishing village that was very difficult to find someone to take us there. We were like, that's the spot. Years later, I was in his studio, and Paul Bressica was showing me notebooks full of watercolor and wash paintings that he had done on a 5-day trip to that exact spot. And he says, yeah, I was there. I said, wow, that's a beautiful, amazing trip. You must have had such a wonderful time. I was like, no, I hate it. I didn't want to go. I don't like it where it's hot. I don't like it in the sun. I don't like when there's smoke and reefer everywhere. I don't like it. I didn't want to go. But my daughters forced me to go. So I went there for 5 days, and he came back with 2 or 3 of these Stonehenge, these notebooks full of watercolor and wash paintings. And then he did a whole bunch of oil paintings from those in his studio. So this is the attitude that I showed up with in Jamaica, right? I'm like, I gotta work. But then I said, okay, I need to learn how to vacate. So so I was on the beach, and when it's really hot and you jump in the water and you come back out and you kind of bake in the sun and the cool breeze comes, you can go into another state, right? It's like that state of you're awake and dreaming at the same time, and space opens up internally. So that was happening, and I remember this lesson on the end. So this was one of my least favorite teachers ever in undergrad, and he was a drawing teacher of mine, and I was so mad because I paid my undergrad fees and I took this class and I felt like I got ripped off because it didn't teach me anything the whole semester. I was so mad for years. And then I ended up in Jamaica years later, and I remember this one lesson that he taught us at the end. There was this lesson at the time, I was like, God, this is so stupid. But he said, take your charcoal, put it on the paper, don't pick it off the paper, and then do units. You do 4 and 4, and 3 and 2, and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And this was all about proportion and units and measurements and control. But on paper, on chart, it was just, we all had these dumb drawings of meanders across the page, and it was like, come around, did you pick up your pen? And I was like, yeah, I picked up my pen. Can you just give us a real lesson? So that's how it felt in the moment. But then I'm on the beach in Jamaica, like 15 years later or something, and I picked up a stick off the ground, and I said, what am I gonna do? And I start dragging it along. I'm like, I'm not working, I'm not making drawing, I don't have my notebook, And then I do one of these meanders in the sand, and I didn't pick up, the stick, and it's different because now there's the resistance of the material, and I'm standing up, and I'm in a different place, and I'm in a different time, and I'm in a different state of mind, and I'm relaxed in a way that I have never been relaxed drawing before, because I know that in a few hours the tide is going to come and wash it all away. So it doesn't matter how bad my meander is. I'm not getting a grade, and there's no paper to submit, and I don't have to erase it, and I don't have to recycle it, and I don't have to burn it, because I can do this for hours, and it's just gonna go. And it was an incredibly freeing moment. This was not in Jamaica, this was years later, but that's how this started, was working on the meander. And I did about maybe, I'm gonna say it was a quarter mile of beach, but it was hours and hours and hours of just. And then it became a dance because I'm moving around in order to make these marks without picking up the stick, because the way the sand resists, if you move it in one way, it flies away from you out of control. So you need to get in the right position. So this is happening, and I'm doing these meanders, and then people are walking by me and not wanting to walk on it. And I'm starting to feel bad, like we're on a public beach and people don't want to walk near the water. And then this one Rasta comes at the end of the day, and he starts walking right around. So I went up to him and I said, so many people walking by here today, nobody wanted to walk on the trail. And you just walk with the feeling, so I don't just know why. He says, it's the beach, man. Right? I mean, finally someone got it, right? Finally someone got it. And then I speaking to him for a little bit, and he says, man, that's an Irish meditation. I was like, oh, okay, that's what it is. Because I've been doing this for 3 hours, not knowing what I'm doing. And here comes the guy and he says, all right, man, this is a meditation. So, okay, but nothing comes of it. I'm just doing it and it washes away. Then eventually, years later, my wife says to me, it's actually really fun to watch you do it. You should do a piece. So I realized that you walk out there with a broom and you start to sweep the sand. That's insane. That's crazy. Who goes on the beach and sweeps the sand? Only if you definitely want to fail. You try to sweep the sand on the beach, So something happened where I said, okay, I'm going to start to sweep. And then in the act of sweeping, I realized I had to choose a direction. I had to go clockwise or counterclockwise. Simple things like this, but seemed profound to me at that time. Okay, I need to choose now. I need to choose one way or the other. So I chose one way. And then I started to make this drawing. And the first day I made the drawing and I filmed it, and it didn't come out square in the camera because it was on the top of the lifeguard chair. It came out trapezoid, because it was keystone. So I went back and I watched this video and I realized I This was before everybody had drones. So then I realized if I just set up the camera first, and then I draw my square to the camera, my square will be a trapezoid the opposite way. And when you see it in the picture, it'll be square to the camera. So this ended up being a trapezoid flat, like 15 feet on the bottom and 30 feet on the top. But you see it flat. And then everything on the bottom is much smaller than everything on the top. Like you have to draw things on the top almost twice as big. And the center line actually has to be not the center line, right? Because the center line, if you center it, then it's going to be too far to the bottom. So I would make the center line higher up so that it would balance out. So I figured this much out, and it took me a couple of days of drawing this and filming it, and I got this far with the broom, with the sweeping to start, and then drawing with it. And this was so raw, like I didn't even sharpen the broomstick. Like later versions, I was like, okay, well, make this a real implement, like sharpen the broomstick and give yourself an edge. You can. Okay, so I got this far, filmed it, put it down, watched it, and realized so much more could happen. Right? There's transformations waiting to take place. So then I did the whole thing again, and then the next day, I started the transformation, so the second movement. This is the second movement. So each day I had to start from the beginning, obviously, start the drawing from the beginning and then work in the second transformation. I got this far, and then I took it back and I watched it. And I realized that it was another possibility that I hadn't taken it far. And all this time I'm thinking of my teacher, Graham Nixon. He would have us do these giant drawings on paper, huge. I still have them. These rolls of like 10, 12-foot drawings of the model and umbrellas and weird stuff that, where are you ever going to show these? Display these. But what are you going to do with these? But you can't throw them out because you work so hard on them. So I've got these 10-foot rolls of drawings that I have no idea what. And you want to work monumental. He's teaching you how to work big, how to get outside of your head, how to get outside of the little mark, how to, instead of being bigger than your drawing, to be inside your drawing. Like there's all these lessons to be had from working large. But when you do it on paper, it's like you're what do you do with it when you're done? And there was this incredible freedom when I was doing it on the beach. I was like, I don't have to roll this up. I don't have to roll it up. I can make it as big as I want. So that's what it was. And then I realized, but Graham's always telling us to push it. He's always telling us to push it, push it, push it. And there was this one, he taught us this lesson. Every year there's a benefit for the school to raise some money. And he would always want all the students to do 3 transcriptions, and we would put the transcriptions on the tables, and people would bid a little bit of money to take home the transcriptions, you know? So I did my 3, and I'm walking through his office, you know, a few days before the benefit, and he would have us do all other stuff too, like group drawings, very large group drawings. We had a lot of stuff we were supposed to do for the benefit, in addition to all of our other work. And I said, okay, I did my 3 transcriptions. He said, okay, great, go do another one. Okay, I get it, Graham, I get it now. He said, what? I said, it doesn't matter. How much I do, you're always going to tell me to do more. And essentially just smiled, you know. So I have Graham in my head every day, like, I just did this great thing, I never did this before. Do more. So, okay, then I figured this out. Final movement in this transformation. And you can start to see here, actually, this reveals a little bit the trapezoid and the camera angle because it's the same broom, but you see how wide the marks are on the bottom. Okay, so that was Babylon. I called it Babylon because this, you know, this idea of the Babylonian exile, the Jewish people were forced out of their homeland, and it's the land of Israel, and forced into exile by the Babylonians. And there were other exiles too, but the Babylonian exile, to some extent, I mean, that's the one that was also now taken up by the Rastafari. Babylon is the state of exile. And the way I understand it now, through the Jewish tradition and the Rastafari tradition, is Babylon is the state of exile. It's physical, but it's not just physical, because now it's not like Babylon is not a place like America, but it's a state of mind and it's a social system and a certain way things work. That's Babylon system. So I understood that Babylon system essentially is conflict. And that's the story of Migdal Babel, of the Tower of Babel, right? They were all working together to achieve this goal of transcending, right? To attain the unknown. And I mean, this is, some people here say the story literally, and I tend not to do that, right? But it is the literal story is very strong in terms of the imagery it gives you is primitive people trying to achieve heights that were unattainable, working together and building a tower so that they could reach the heights of God, right? But then the story goes, they got a little too close, right? Whatever that means. So the way I understand now this idea of Babylon is Eden is the state of residence, where we communicate, we understand, and we have peace. And Babylon is the state of conflict. And however it expresses itself, it doesn't matter. Like that would be the archetype, and then it expresses itself in husband and wife fighting, mother and child, parent and child, let's say, not getting along, siblings not getting along, and then of course it expands to nations and nation states, and et cetera, et cetera. So that was why this became Babylon, is because it can be washed away. So the meditation or the prayer in this case is that the state of Babylon is temporary. And then a few years later, I had the opportunity in a residency. The director, the head of the guy who owned the place, owned a concrete plant. So he said, okay, you can go into the concrete plant and work in concrete. So I was like, okay, well, I'll go make direct drawings in concrete, and then we'll put these drawings in a clearing in the woods. That just gives you the situation, right? It's in a clearing in the woods. So it's the quintessential. And then there's just another one. This was a fellow resident who was a video artist. So she had this idea of filming the installation. So quintessential 4x4 square of concrete. That was my world when I was a kid in Brooklyn, for these concrete squares. And then being able to, essentially, the difference between drawing in sand and drawing in concrete is the binder, right? It's essentially, I mean, there's aggregates of different sizes, but essentially it's sand and water and binder, or sand and water. So the difference between the permanence and the ephemeral is just that binder. So you add the binder, it becomes concrete, and then it becomes, permanent, right? But so we took the quintessential element of the city and put it into nature, and the prayer here is for the state of Eden, right? And I said, like, not Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, like in that literal way, but the possibility of, well, in the Rastafarian way that they take it from the Old Testament, they talk about Babylon, and then they talk about the yearning for Zion, right? And Zion is essentially the return to Eden, the aspiration once you experience it in a state of Babylon, like a state of conflict. So the goal was to bring that back into nature and have it face the heavens and just be there permanently. And all of this coming out of all that work that was done with the model, work from nature, work from life, like all of that discipline and devotion to working from the masters, working from nature, to get to the point where in an afternoon you can go and make this thing, right? Okay, so that's the story of those two. And then I'm going to finish with that figure that I told you, that I remember I said, pay attention to that figure in that left. Okay, so then Resica came to my studio. This was like an incredible kid in his 80s, and he took a whole afternoon, but essentially we painted a day. When you're 24, a day, whatever. When you're 84 and you're painting and you're trying to make as many paintings as you can make, But there it is. He pointed out that figure, and then after that studio visit, I started to go deeper and deeper, just into the figure. And then later I encountered the idea of the viewing and the archetype and the space changing in the painting, and how that's related to how this archetype is shifting for me. This is over a whole bunch of years. This is about 32 by 40 inches. This one was the shadow. And then you see that figure up top. Remember I told you there was the Buddha, right, that I was drawing. So like this is how these things come in and out, right? I did actual drawings of the main figure in real life. This was my teacher that I mentioned to you. And then, going to the masterworks, and then somehow trying to put them all in. And then my teacher actually would teach with his computer there. So like, it was this weird technique. It was like, we're going to go back to the time of the boot. Like we'll go to like 800, and then we'll go to, CE, sorry, 800 CE, something. And then to today, and, there were a lot of things happening in these paintings for me that I was trying, some of them with awareness and some of them not, to do in the paintings. This is 24 by 36 inches. 32 by 40. Okay, so you can see how like the structure of the painting is changing, right? The space in the painting is changing. That's reflecting how this is shifting for me internally, and it's reflected in the painting. And then when you see it in the painting, then you can respond to it as something that's embodied outside of yourself. Take it back in and put it back out. So one of the great advantages of painting, of the plastic arts, is the ability to do that. You externalize, embody it outside of yourself, and then you can relate to it as an object, like as the other, and then bring it back in as the self. It's like the ocean shores, right? The self itself can become a literal space. Right? That's shifting, that's changing. Okay, so that happens. And then we end up with, this is the most recent, these are about 18 by 12 inches or so. So these were in the most recent exhibition. These are acrylic and pencil on paper. This is 4 by 6 inches. Okay, I will say this. With Gurudev, this was his name. Gurudev is his name. What he tried to teach us in Satnam Messiah, which is a healing art, in a way, the external branch of Kundalini Yoga. So Kundalini Yoga, you heal yourself through the practice. Satnam Messiah is you take that practice and you heal someone else. So he was teaching this to us, and always the intention was very important. So when you go to do the Satnam Messiah, you have to have the intention to heal. And the more specific you can get about the intention, the more specific you can get in the healing. Right? But it's very hard to know these things. Like diagnosis is very difficult in Satnam Messiah. So then how do you have intention for something specific? So this was what's happening in these paintings. As I'm doing these paintings, I'm saying, okay, I want to do something, like I said to you earlier, very specific, right? But at the same time, it's only going to become known to me as I paint it. But as these happened, I understood certain things about individual paintings and what they are supposed to do for you, like functionally. So I'll just choose one. This one, first of all, all those ocean shores? So I'm taking all the colors from that experience, right? Which I don't know that I could have found it another way. This is from experience, right? So these colors go back there, and then this whole experience is about the flow of your own existence, right? Like that space, and being able to do that and not float away. So like you can be constant and moving. So each one relates to another state that we experienced with Gurudev, like in his presence, and then how does that become embodied in a painting so that you can offer that possibility of entry to someone else. So this one essentially is that sensation of, it's meant to do this, like embody this so that it becomes a possibility for other people. And I don't usually want to prescribe the paintings, but I'm going to say a few things like that. So about this one, it's feeling grounded without feeling weighted down. Okay. So I won't go into all of them like that, but and now I'm going to skip. You'll see the images, but I'm going to go to the mother and child, and I'll end with that. Eye candy for a second. No words. So Jay was talking about, and I'm going to end it with this. So, but Jay was talking about being able to experience the medieval paintings. First of all, I first saw the Cimabue in person in Assisi with Graham Nixon and Karen Wilkin on that same marathon that I showed you those drawings with the weight and mass. That was the same one. Okay, so at that period of time, I first saw, and I've been to Italy before, but this is the first time I was in Assisi and I saw the Cimabue. And the medieval space, it can be, so like Jay said, kind of feel inaccessible in a certain way. And on top of that, for me, having grown up the way I grew up with this Orthodox, I'll show you a picture, Orthodox Jewish background, related back to the state of Babylon, where we have these conflicts between groups of people, right? So, but always I was taught, essentially, that all of this Jesus stuff was idol worship. You were not supposed to go into church, like physically go into the church. So forget about looking at the paintings in the original or studying them with a devotional attitude. It was just don't even go in. So I grew up that way, and obviously I moved away from it in many ways. But at the time, experiencing the Cimabue felt very transgressive to me. Right, just going into the church to do it felt like. Not quite as bad as the first time I went to Italy when in 1999, where I almost couldn't stomach the experience because, when you go to Italy, there's Jesus and Mary everywhere. So I couldn't walk into a shop to get a coffee and not see that in front of me. My sensibilities at that time in 1999, when I was around 20 years old, it was really shook me up. I couldn't handle it really. And then I went back in 2008. It was a little bit calmer, but I couldn't access it. It was closed to me, because I couldn't see the painting as a painting. I could only see that imagery of Jesus and Mary and all the conflict between the Jews and the Christians and all this, whatever, all that's history. I couldn't see the painting. But I drew it anyway, because I'm a faithful student and my teacher said to draw it. So I drew it. I didn't like it, but I ate my vegetables, and I went home. And then many years later, not in the last 5 years, then my wife got pregnant, and she gave birth, and she had to be delivered as a C-section. They were concerned, in the delivery process. We planned the whole thing where the baby's going to crawl up on the mama and do the kangaroo and chest to chest and all that and smell her mama. And the father's just going to be I'm support, I'm there. I'm here for you if you need me, but, not essential, But then because of the C-section, the child gets taken to the NICU for observation and the mother has to go to another section of the hospital and they're not together. So my wife said to me, here, you go be with her. So, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do because I didn't train for this, but okay. I go to NICU and I get in there. And so I told her, okay, well, I said to the nurse, let's do kangaroo. And she looked at me like I was out of my mind. She's like, well, I said, well, come on, let's do it. I'm not, So she gets the baby and she puts her on my chest. And so that first night, it was me with the baby. And what happened was just an experience that I had never had before or since. But kind of emerging. Okay, I'm gonna back up. When she was pregnant, you know, everybody, you see it always in the movies, always on television. The baby kicked. Oh my God, I can feel the baby. Right? Everyone like the baby's there, and they put your hand on the belly. Like, oh my God, feel the baby, feel the baby. So I would try that. Like I put my hand on my wife's belly, you know, and she allowed it. I put my hand on her belly. I never felt the baby kick. And certainly not early on, we were kicking. But one night I put my arm around and I felt like it was a very strong pulsation. Right? And it was like, it's like, what is that? And I asked my wife, do you feel it? She's like, yes, that's what it's like all the time. So I was like, oh my God, that energy is way, way, way bigger than your belly. I'm feeling this in myself now. So that's what happened when she was pregnant. And then this night, when I was holding her, that was multiplied by. Let's just call it infinity because it was so much greater than I could quantify. Right? And then I started watching my wife after that, of course, you know, after we got out of the NICU. Well, by the next morning, my wife was there and she didn't leave her side until, you know, we went home, and then my wife, she was with my wife pretty much for the next 3 years by her side all the time. And I did notebooks full. So there's like one drawing, this is like my favorite one, but there's notebooks and notebooks and notebooks full. And you know, when you look at like MGSoA is so good at painting babies and like, you know, babies and mothers and stuff. When you see the nursing child, it looks so peaceful. In the paintings, I don't know if you all feel like that, but when I would see paintings, or when I would imagine the woman breastfeeding, it seemed so divine, wonderful, and peaceful. But the actual act of breastfeeding is totally different. It's first of all, there's no stillness at all about it. There's constant movement. The baby is not still. She's grabbing, she's reaching, she's pulling hair, she's patting her, she's switching sides, you know, my wife is in pain. It's like not all pleasant. And for me, like I'm trying to draw them and they're constantly moving and I'm just, and I don't want to say, can you just be still or just stay? Because I know something much more important than my drawing is going on, you know, but come on, guys, just give me a chance. So there's notebooks full of this internal conflict going on in this beautiful, you know, peaceful, serene moment. But as all of this is happening, that the Chimabue opened up. And suddenly, and this is we're going to come full circle to the Jungian archetypes. So people would ask, now people said to me, accused me of making religious paintings, you know. And I understand that I opened myself up to misinterpretation by doing this kind of imagery, right? But essentially, for me, the way it opened up and the way that I experienced it and what I'm trying to work through here is not the religious Jesus and Mary. It's the experience of the archetype of the mother and child. As I experienced it myself as the mother and as observing the mother, because I got that one chance to be in the mother's place for a moment, you know, just for a moment and changed my life. And then I observed my wife doing this with her for the next few years. And suddenly I had no problem with Jesus and Mary at all because it seemed to me the most natural thing in the world, that it would be the Holy Mother and the Divine Child, because I just saw the Holy Mother and the Divine Child in my bedroom, you know, and I was experiencing this day in and day out. And suddenly all those barriers, the religious barrier broke down. And later I understood that what was happening was I was actually accessing the archaic remnant. I was accessing that archetype, that form of the mother and child as the primary archetype. And it has been expressed in this particular religion in the West in this way for so long that people see it this way, no matter what you do. If you draw a mother and child, people will see Jesus and Mary, right? But Jesus wasn't the first child, and Mary wasn't the first mother. And certainly, Jesus was not the first mother who thought he was a divine child, right? And definitely not the last, right? So this blew it open for me. And I started making these paintings, and then the Jungian archetype, what he says about activating, animating the archetype, is your own experience, is what happened for me, is my own experience, opened up the possibilities of this archetype. But we had a second child, so she comes in, and I'm looking at Giotto, and I'm looking at Cimabue, and I'm looking at Titian, and I'm looking at Raphael, and I'm looking at real life and drawing them from life. And we'll talk about this another time, how they became shaped paintings. But suffice it to say that I've been wanting to make shaped paintings for 20 years, but I didn't want to make arbitrarily shaped paintings. And then finally the paintings called me to make these shaped paintings, and it was just blessings on blessings. And I'll just read you this last thing from Whitman, and that'll be all. It's the final, so this is again a song of myself, but it's divided into 52 sections. So this is section 52. And I only put up the last part of it, so instead of showing you the slide, I'll keep this up here and read you this half, the last of it. So I'll say my interpretation first, and we'll end with Whitman's words. So I understand this as Whitman speaking to us, the acolytes, the people who are coming to him as the poet, and he's telling us all these beautiful things about life and experience. But I also understand the final 3 lines as the poetic or artistic vision itself speaking to the poet. And so that's in that vein is how I'm reading the last 3 lines. But the lines that come before that really is the poet speaking to us. In other words, the great artist speaking to the students, right? The master speaking to the disciple. And then in the end, it's that, the last 3 lines is the master speaking to the disciple, the poet speaking to the listener, and the poetic vision or the artistic vision speaking to the poet or the artist. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I infuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your pencils. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good help to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere, waiting.
Can you talk a little bit more about why that Cezanne image is feminine? Can you pull that up? Or?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Anatomy textbook, female anatomy, and then look at the top of that painting. So I understand the yoni, the idea of the yoni or the feminine is the idea of the womb or the space that contains. So essentially, if I'm saying what's feminine, what's feminine is the container, is that space that can contain in itself the seed of all existence. And what's masculine, the lingam, is represented by that form, that ellipsoid form, right? And in India, in the temples, they anoint those lingams with milk, I mean, this is like worship. You go to the temple and you anoint the lingam with milk. So that is the masculine is the active principle, right? The principle that delivers the seed, right? That penetrates the space, the object that moves through the possibility that's provided by the yoni, by the feminine, by the womb, by the space, right? So to me, that painting essentially is about that space that's opening up, that she's inside and outside of that space, like she moves. That's the amazing thing about painting is that As soon as you start, you think you know where everything is in the painting. This is the lesson I got from David Lewis. It's the dominant. He never said it this way. So it may not really be his idea. But then again, he may not have said it because it's part of his gestalt, right? Not to say it. But my understanding is there's the dominant reading. So as soon as you come up to the painting, everything sits in a certain place. You read it a certain way. There's that female character sitting behind the forward characters that are the men, ogling her or whatever, wanting to touch her, groping her. It's really freaky. I mean, how could he make that painting? I mean, like, okay, he could make it, but how could he leave it for everybody else to look at? Like, if I made that painting, I don't know if I would show it to anybody. You know, I'd be embarrassed to like, there's some paintings that I see people make that I'm like, of course I relate to it, but like, if I made it, I wouldn't show you that I did that. You know, and there's like a Picasso painting I've been studying too recently, the print, the Minotauro Maki. And I think, like, I don't think he wanted it. If he knew how much he was revealing of himself in that print, I don't think he would have left it, you know? And I feel the same way about this painting. It's so uncomfortable. But yeah, that's what I mean by the feminine. It's like, it's that, the whole painting is that space of the womb, right? It's that, just that possibility of the womb opening up space that way and coming down in space this way. And then she's the only nude figure. It's like all these men are clothed, it's the, you know, déjeuner sur l'herbe or what. I mean, it's like, so she's the only nude figure. It's almost like, and this I think relates to Demoiselle d'Avignon, and you'll see the same structure at the top of Demoiselle d'Avignon, but you have to continue drawing beyond where the canvas is. So if you take Demoiselle d'Avignon, which is like that, but you add a few inches to your drawing and you keep the geometry, it happens that you end up with this Gothic type of cathedral, church, reverential space, like a sacred space. And I think that's what's happening here, is there's a sacred space, like that kind of archway, that would like that kind of, that we associate with these temples of worship and these holy sacred places. It's like that sacred space, and then there's the nude feminine in it. And so, and I think that's the flip too. So there's the dominant reading and there's the flip. So the dominant reading is like kind of like a strip joint. I mean, like in Cézanne's time, whatever it was like, but like there's one nude figure and a bunch of men with dollar bills or whatever, you know? I mean, I'm saying it's super crude because, but that's the dominant reading. It's like, it's so terrifying. But then the flip, right? When you deconstruct the painting and you see that architecture in it, suddenly it's like, well, maybe it's not just like this aggressive, grasping, looking and eating her with their eyes and whatever, right? Like that kind of desire, that kind of Babylon conflict. Or maybe it's a state of Eden. Maybe he's prayerfully saying, like, trying to get back to, and I know we're going to get into like dividing the sacred and the profane and the Madonna and the whore and all of these relationships, but I think they're in that pain, they're contained in there. And I think the same thing in Demoiselle. It looks like a brothel, but it's actually a church, you know? And it's the painting for Picasso is the worship. The painting is the church. So the painting itself becomes the church and the brothel itself becomes the sacred space for him, you know? And he's working through that archetype. He's working through all those archetypes through the painting. So that's, that's long and the short.
Thank you. I want to say,
Thank you very much.